This show is brought to you by Sparkade, our ADHD game-based learning platform that helps kids transform challenges into opportunities. Parents and educators, join the waitlist at play.sparkade.app/waitlist and be among the first to experience Sparkade when we launch. That is play.sparkade.app. You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course to the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Today, we're joined by Lainey Hills, founder of CuriouslyDivergent and Neuro. Lainey is an autistic advocate and educator who helps organizations understand why so many neurodivergent employees struggle, not because of capability, but because of how workplaces are designed. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, Lainey. I know we really hit it off the last time we spoke, and you wanted to understand me. I remember you mentioning that you wanted to know me, and I really appreciate that. And I think we should know who we're talking to.
Well, I think that my education was entirely in psychology, and I think that's really a normal field for a lot of us to go into because, you know, especially growing up, I always felt like I was outside the circle, like I didn't understand people. One year, I spent an entire year sitting underneath the same tree at recess watching kids because I wanted to understand them and I wanted to figure out why I didn't fit in. You know, I never did totally figure that out when I was elementary, but I think that psychology is something that a lot of us end up going into. Psychology and tech seem to be the two big fields for us.
It's funny that you mentioned psychology because it's not something that I chose, but I was just gravitated towards it. Even on TV shows, fiction, always wanted to know the deeper connection, especially with the show This Is Us. I just loved it. I loved the dynamics and I would cry with the people acting. I fell for it. I think and it's crazy that how we are drawn to these fields and technology. I mean, my background was in accounting and I hated it. And that was my trauma, trying to fit in, trying to be in that field because I had studied. So I just love that you brought up these two aspects, which we see as a common denominator.
Absolutely. And, you know, when you were talking about liking the psychology stuff, I think that's something that we see all the time with, you know, when they ask us about understanding ourselves. Well, neurodivergence, we know us, you know, you bring up a personality test, Myers-Briggs or our strength finders or whatever. We've taken all of them. We can tell you what our shampoo says about us because we've probably taken that quiz too. You know, anything that because we really do have that ache to connect. And I think the internet has done so much for us as far as connecting one another, because for the longest time, you know, we're in this tiny minority, figured out as kids usually that suppressing some part of us to, you know, play normal is to our advantage. And most of us did that. So we get to adulthood and we really do have this, why do I not have the rules that everybody else has? I felt like there was a day in school where everybody else figured out how to people and I was sick that day and nobody was allowed to tell me because I've always felt that way. And when I encounter other neurodivergents, I don't feel that way. It's amazing what happens when two neurodivergents connect. Neurodivergents are like Furbies, and you know, Furbies will kind of just bebop around doing their thing until they encounter another Furby, and then they get really excited and they spin around and dance. And that's kind of what happens when neurodivergents interact with each other. And I think it's interesting that the world tells us that we have communication problems, but we don't have communication problems with each other ever. And I've never seen it. You know, even two nonverbal people, they communicate. We communicate. We have the ability to communicate with one another because we understand each other. And I wish that was something that was more, understood on a broader scale.
Yeah, unless they're masking. I've seen that because when you're masking, you don't want to acknowledge your flaws or your shortcomings or challenges, and you're fitting in, and it's not intentional. We all did it subconsciously. And that's why authenticity is so critical, that we have to peel off those layers years to figure out who we truly are and why are we behaving in these fashions. Because if we are not in our authentic self, it's going to come back and bite us. It will torment us when we sleep. It just will contribute a lot to mental health problems. And so, but once we are unmasked, we connect so rapidly, fast.
Oh, absolutely. I was diagnosed autistic at 3. And I remember, I just put together some puzzles for a guy, and I had a great time. But I remember, the guy talking to my mom afterwards, and it was the first time I saw my mom cry. And I didn't know what I had done wrong. And I figured something had to be terribly wrong with me. And I remember just feeling like I'm broken. And, that was repeated by how I was treated socially. And the message that came clear to me from the beginning was that they told me I had a learning disability. Nobody thought to tell me that there was a social component to autism ever. So it's something I had to figure out on my own. Still didn't make the connection, but I thought if I could just play normal and I could just fit in, then it would be okay. And I was deeply masked. Into my 30s, I told nobody that I was autistic. And funny enough, it wasn't the autism that brought me to my knees. It was the ADHD. It was out of control. And that's what I ended up just throwing my hands up and saying, I have to do something. And it was just at the doctor's office. She had a question on there, have you ever been diagnosed with it? It was the first time in 30 years that I admitted that I was autistic. That was the first time. It was in none of my medical charts. It was in nothing because I pretended that it didn't exist. And, I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad that I had that question. And still, women's experience at the doctor, when we seek some help on this, we're still diagnosed at a rate of 8, or misdiagnosed at a rate of 80%. That is unacceptable, but we seem to get misdiagnosed with the same 3 things, and it's borderline, bipolar, or an anxiety disorder. And, all of those disorders come with medications, and if you're taking a medication that you don't need for a condition you don't have, obviously that medication isn't going to work well. And we have so many women that socially, especially in the United States here, we're almost conditioned to just agree with the authority in the room, right? As little girls, we're told, oh, listen, sit still, behave, be nice. And so women statistically are much less likely to disagree with their doctor. So they'll continue taking a medication that isn't working and just pretending with their doctor that, oh yeah, it's working great. I feel wonderful. But not, always feeling like, wow, there's something just wrong with me. And I love that, I see women all over the world now that are learning about themselves in 1-minute increments on social media, which is amazing. Because if I had been taking a medication, look at some of the bipolar meds, they have some huge side effects. And if I don't need that med and I've been taking it for years and then suddenly I don't need it anymore and I find out, oh, if only I had just taken this test for autism, I would have understood this about myself way, way back there. I think that it's very freeing to a lot of women, but we do suffer even then that sense of almost grief. Why didn't anybody catch this in me? Why didn't anybody see this?
I think it's evolution. That's what I feel. Because if I look back, I'm like, why didn't I have all the answers? But then I would not have produced the solution that we're building. So there is a why. We might not know the exact reasons, but I think it's just the way humanity is evolving, and internet, AI, all of that are avenues where we can, first of all, speak our truth, social media, and then just get the information we were blocked from.
It's connecting people like nothing else. And I'm seeing it with men, with women, with older people, with younger people. And, I've heard people tell me, they're like, oh, well, this autism thing, it's like a new thing, right? Well, no, it's not. We've always had it, but we had different words for it. I think forever we have identified, a certain tiny group of the population as, okay, this looks different. But, I think even that's interesting. Recently, I talked to a gentleman. He's brilliant, amazing. He's speaking at Yale next month. He's awesome. He was nonverbal until he was 11 or 12. And what we find is that nonverbal autistics are treated one way, but as soon as you give them communication devices, suddenly their IQ goes up 70 points. Well, they were that smart the day before the communication device. You just didn't understand them. And I think that's something that we really do need to keep in mind, that just because we don't understand somebody doesn't change their intelligence, and it doesn't change their ability to think and reason and all of that. He was the same person before he started communicating as he is today. So I do want to call that out. But I think forever we've always identified, certain percentage saying, yes, these people are different, right? But, Grandpa would freak out if you sat in his chair. And, we think of Sheldon and his spot on the couch, and that's my spot. And it was just eccentric then, but it has existed in families forever. So, if you're on the internet and you're finding these things and going, wow, I think this might be me. And then somebody mentions that there is a hereditary component. You're like, oh, well, nobody else in my family is autistic. Well, really think about that. Were they eccentric? Was there something a little odd about some of them? And when we talk about even at work and identification and disclosing and all of that, and in the US, we have EEOC that says you can ask for medical documentation if the condition is not obvious. Well, research is really clear that we're usually pretty obvious. You can see that we think differently in all we do. And, just speak on that employment piece, because this is something so many of us face. 89% of neurodivergents face outright discrimination at work. And that is a huge number. And, I just think to myself, if this were some of the other impacted populations, 89% facing discrimination, this would be a campaign issue, and nobody's talking about it. So it's something that does need to be brought up, and it's something that is the entire focus of what I'm doing right now, because EEOC, for most of us, it's a poster in the break room. We don't interact with the EEOC. We don't know much about it. And so many workers look to their HR as this is the source and the place that I'm going to get help from if I'm in trouble, because that's what they tell you in training on day 2. Your HR comes in, oh, were you ever a victim of sexual harassment, or and they go through all these scenarios, but they don't talk about disability. And it's something that, although I don't agree that we are necessarily disabled in and of ourselves, I do believe that we are definitely disabled by expectations that society puts on us. If I'm having an emotional conversation with my partner, do you want my attention and my heart, or do you want my eye contact? Because you're not getting both. And at work, that translates to, I know that I have RSD. So if you come to me with a criticism and you expect a mature, professional, put together answer in that moment, you're not going to get it if you're springing that on me, because I am offline. My brain is not there. I am in fight or flight. I am panicking and going through all of these scenarios of why you, I'm sure, hate me. Do I stay in that forever? No, but I don't have any control over that initial reaction. Well, this is something managers can fix just by sending me an email 15 minutes in advance and saying, hey, I noticed this. I just want to talk to you about it. I'm not upset. Can we schedule a time? Okay. Great. Now I know this is what we're talking about. I have some time to prepare, and I'm going into that meeting knowing that I'm able to get back on track. And, if 15 minutes isn't enough, schedule it for an hour, schedule whatever. Just schedule that time. And this is something that is so easy to do. Neurodivergence cannot be managed like neurotypical. You put a neurodivergent on a PIP, and you are almost signing their termination paperwork. There are things that I think every neurodivergent who's listening to this needs to understand about work, because it is so often done. These are absolutely black and white against EEOC regulations in every case. So if these are happening to you, you need to bring it up. Almost every PIP that I have ever seen from any company includes language on there. And I do need to make a small thing here. You have to have disclosed. You have to have asked for some accommodation. And I encourage, I know there's a lot of discussion about that. I'm running a couple of polls right now online about it, on whether or not to disclose. And there's pluses and minuses on both sides, and I get it. But at some point, if you're kind of at work and you're like, wow, I'm feeling like I'm in trouble. You know what? If there is a accommodation that would help you, disclose. The law is really actually on our side. It does support us. And if you need remote work, or you need a flexible schedule or something like that, disclose. Get some help. But if you're on a PIP, and that PIP, and you've disclosed, has anything on there preventing your movement within the company for 12 months or 6 months or whatever it is, that is directly in violation of EEOC language. And that is something you need to bring up to your HR. You need to bring up and fight for that, because sometimes, it's just a manager change. In my own experience with this, and this is the reason I got here, I accidentally became an advocate. I accidentally became an outspoken expert in this it wasn't intended. I was perfectly happy doing what I did. I had one manager that in 11 months, after 12 years with the company, I'd never been written up before. He took my job in 11 months. And it was because I communicated differently. And he saw my communication as insubordination. And it never was intended that way. So, and I did everything right. I went to HR. I filed my own EEOC. And, what they had no idea of is my dad was an accountant and his dad was an attorney. So I saved all those receipts and I made sure I read EEOC policy myself. I was able to interpret it. I was able to do that. But not all of us have that background to be able to do that. So we need to get some attention out there. We need to get some help out there. And that's really what I've been doing. And I think the best way to do this, one, neurodivergents need to understand what our rights are. And that is so fundamental because so many of us still look to HR to help us. And HR is employed by the company. And statistically speaking, if you look at all of the experience of the neurodivergents that we've had, statistically, HR sides with managers. They just do. And they side with the company and we end up terminated. And that's not what I want for any of us. So, really understand your rights. And that would be something I would love to be able to sit down with every person in the world and just say, hey, this is what your rights are and this is what you need. And this is, this will make it better. Accommodations are not favors, by the way. That is something that we really need to understand. They are not favors. And an accommodation needs to actually accommodate. So if you are ADHD and you have requested a scheduling app to help you determine what is the most important thing for the day, because that is something that we legitimately struggle with, right? But the app costs $29.99 a month and your employer says, oh, well, we have this great free resource on Teams that none of us are using. That's not accommodating what you need. So they're not providing the accommodation. And the only excuse they have out of that is to say this is causing an undue burden on the company. Well, if you're working for a company that's making any kind of a profit, I don't think $29.99, they're going to be able to stand up in court and say, yeah, this is going to be an undue burden. So these are things that we really do need. So the conversation should be between you and your manager. Your doctor is not involved in that conversation according to EEOC. They cannot ask for your diagnosis according to EEOC. Your doctor can write a simple note on a piece of paper that says, so-and-so has a condition that would benefit from accommodation. This condition is permanent. Period. Here you go. That is the only thing that legally you need to provide to them. Period.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that because, first of all, people don't know they're neurodivergent. And so I would just encourage to find that out, however they choose. And your advice is priceless because the younger me would have benefited from that if I had heard it. So, and you're so right. The HR works for the company. And I wish it was not like that. And they didn't treat them as, as the leaders of the company as authority, because if they are here for the human being, we're all humans. Let's play it fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because research also really clear that neurodivergents are wonderful for companies. And this is a study that I saw at the very beginning of my experience with what I went through. And if I had known it was going to be this important, I would have saved it. But if anybody knows this research, please send me a message or something because I'd love to have it again. But it was a study on groups and it was just a whole bunch of groups. There was a church group, a sports group, a work group. And so they had the test group and the control group. And in the control group, a neurodivergent was in every one of them. And they said to the control group, business as usual, just do your thing. In the test groups, the only thing they were required to do is whatever the neurodivergent person in the group suggested, and they had to try it. That was it. And in the test groups, they were 87 times more likely to meet or exceed the group's stated goals. And it's because of how neurodivergent think. We're able to think in this four-dimensional way where we connect things like, and I think I've told you this before, I've never had a neurotypical thought in my life, but I imagine it to be this really organized place, it's a library and it's quiet in there and you can go to a section and pull down information. But to a neurodivergent, it's much more like an airport. You have screens flashing over here and there's an announcement overhead and there's a baby crying back there and there's some song on the radio. But in charge of it all, there's still this, air traffic control that's still directing where to go. And people all get where they're going. When you have a neurodivergent in your work atmosphere or whatever, we don't do great with process. We love rules. We have a lot of rules for ourselves, but we need to make them. And if you are just focused and just hammering into a neurodivergent, you have to do it this way. Well, what they're going to do is they're going to push back because it's not the way that they see. You got to give it a second and say, okay, what are you getting at? And we will explain. If you ask us what we're thinking, we will tell you probably more than you wanted to know. But you got to give us a chance. Like sometimes it looks like we're way out in left field, but if you wait for it, I had a manager that was so amazing with this. He used to say, Lainey, I don't always know where you're going, but when we get there, it's usually pretty cool. And he just had to have that trust in me that I'm going to do what's right. And neurodivergent statistically, we're incredibly loyal employees. We are signed on to our company and we really want to do well. If you want to encourage a neurodivergent, praise them. That is more important to us than any money you give us, any bonuses. Praise us. And specifically, if you do it in front of other people, man, we will practically stand on our head to keep doing good for you. We want to do well and we want to please you. So, that is one thing I encourage managers all the time. Don't pick them. Sometimes it's just manager change. Get the ego out of the way. Figure out something else. Like maybe it's a change in time. Like if your neurodivergent employee has ADHD and is coming in late 3 times a week and you're about to fire him for attendance, maybe that schedule isn't working for them. Like perhaps we can make some adjustments. And this doesn't cost the company anything. And fighting against that really is just being vindictive. That's all I can see. It's ego and being vindictive and needing to be right.
Exactly. We just want to feel like we belong and in fact belong. And that goes back to also the thing about changing the language around what an accommodation is. Like you said, the reality is, do we need accommodations? Yes. Do we want accommodations? No, because we would rather, be seen as on the same level as everybody else. And which is what the accommodations are helping us achieve, is be on the same level. It's equity. It's helping our ability. But also we need the feedback of not feeling like, when you make us feel like we are lesser, that we are asking for things that we, to make us feel special. Well, that's damaging. That's abuse.
It is abuse, and it's discrimination. It is outright, blatant discrimination because, let's take remote work as a good example. You had all of these ROIs happening, right? And with all of the ROIs that were happening, return to office, RTOs. So we have all these people going back to the office, and, for an autistic or ADHD or employee, this is not a good thing. When I'm at home, I can control a whole lot of things. I can control, is my light cool or warm? Do I have ambient noise in the background? What temperature is it? Do I have interruptions to my day? And if you're in a pretty open spot in your office and you have ADHD, every time a coworker comes up and says, oh, how was your weekend? You have now put in a transition that doesn't need to happen. And if it's an IM, I can ignore my IMs. I can go on Do Not Disturb. I can do things to protect from transition. But if I'm at the office, I can't always protect from that. So from an office perspective, you have, bless their hearts, they are extroverts and they love interruption and they're mostly neurotypical and they're raw Friday fun meeting time. And your neurodivergents in the office are like, please get rid of the Friday fun meeting. It's terrible. It just interrupts my day. And, but they're really excited about it and they see it as a bonding thing. So returning to the office means that they get to socialize. And unfortunately, that is really the heart of our middle managers because it's what gets promoted. They're the popular kid in school. We all know the popular kid in school. And they are still there. They are in middle management and they are very popular there as well. Seeing these remote work as a favor, it benefits not just neurodivergents. It benefits a lot of people who don't necessarily thrive in that chaos. For the people who thrive in it, absolutely be there. But I think that it's important as humans that we just are able to protect our space. And, in every other situation that we're involved in our lives, we have so much more say in how we're treated, who we interact with, what that looks like. And we're not excluded from, you mentioned your soccer team for your daughter. You're not excluded from the soccer team if you don't want to sit in this section of the bleachers. You can make those choices. If you don't love the mom of, Susie, you don't have to sit next to her. But at work, we lose any of that autonomy and it's based on tradition, and that's all. And it doesn't make sense. So, I think that we really need to have a bigger conversation like lateral movement. Why don't we allow lateral movement? Why don't we encourage it? I think it's something that when I talk to companies, it's something that I challenge them all with. What you get, even from this tiny practice, and I think everybody should do it, from the CEO all the way down to the first day mailroom person. After a year that you've been with a company, I think every employee should be required as part of their development to spend 8 hours shadowing other departments. You're going to develop a couple of things with that. One, you get an employee that has some exposure to where they could go next. You get an employee that has some exposure as to how another department operates. And then when they come back to their team, they're able to bring this information that they learned and say, hey, I was just in this department and this is how they do it. And this is what our work does for them. Maybe we can figure out something. So you have your employees innovating. It costs you nothing. It costs you 1 day of work from that employee. And if you do that, and the CEO, if they come down, what you lose with the executive branch is you lose frontline perspective. And I saw that over and over again, where they would be, companies incentivize being lied to and they don't realize it. Numbers are deeply manipulated. No matter what you're looking at, it's deeply manipulated because they incentivize you. No manager wants it. My promotions are based on this. I don't want it to look bad. So, if I can tweak this a little bit, it's going to look better. So I've seen, executives say they just get very confused and say, I don't understand what's happening. And I tell them, well, when is the last time you spent some time on the floor and listening to your frontline employees? And most of them have no idea. I don't know, I've never done that. Well, why not? If you're going to make policy that affects these people, have one in your meeting. What does it cost you as a company to open your door? If you say you're inclusive and you say, we value every opinion, well, prove it. I see probably more classism than anything else in business.
Yeah. I love the idea of shadowing. I know thought of it, but the second you said it, I'm like, oh my God, especially with our strength in psychology and us looking at patterns, recognizing patterns, we're just going to soak in everything, but we were kept in darkness, right? Intentionally or unintentionally kept in darkness. And one of my biggest strengths is human conversation. And when I sit in front of the user, I can just get it. But traditionally, I was a developer. I wrote code, so it was just me and my computer. But I wish they had put me in front of the end user and just asked me to observe. I would have picked up a lot more things. And even bringing me to meetings. I was never a part of those important meetings because it was me as a coder, right? Which also I love, but I also love human interactions. And
especially if we can benefit somebody from it. And that is in neurodivergence, that is our thing. If we can raise our hand and say, wait, I have that answer and really contribute to that, man, we love it. And you're missing out on that communication. And I don't understand why we don't do it.
I think we're boxed into roles, the title, the roles, and our job description. And if we step out of it, it's wrong. So it's hard to break out of it. But if it was a more flexible environment and the leaders are just open to listening, I think that is a number one quality of leadership, is just listening.
Listening without ego is probably the hardest thing in the world to do because, you're thinking this is the truth and this is what everybody else is expected to do. And, the truth is something that it's still open for interpretation. We have broken equipment, that anything that I witness, anything that I observe, it's going through my eyes that have this filter on them from past trauma and my life experience and my socioeconomic group and my, all of those things play into this on how I perceive a situation. And this is deep psychology, by the way, but whoever I'm talking to has the same broken filters, but it's going through their filters of past trauma and past experience and socioeconomic group and classism and all of that stuff that it goes through. So you and I can both look at the same thing happening, and neither one of us are going to be able to give an unbiased report, whatever we observed. That is human nature. That is the broken equipment we have. And when you have one of those people that has significantly more power in a dynamic than the other, well, which truth is going to be believed? And, I think we've seen that play out in a lot of ways socially. We've seen how police treat people has completely changed in the last, 10, 20 years because people started saying, hey, our truth matters. And that is important. And we need to identify that. And I think that neurodivergents are really at that point now that we're identifying this and saying, hey, how we're treated matters. And so to speak to that, I really do think that change is coming. I think that it's something that there's never been a better time to have this kind of social impact to make this change at work because there's been discrimination for so many years and it's been so blatantly obvious and nothing's been done. Access to attorneys is terrible. A lot of cities don't even have employment attorneys that help employees, and those that do require these giant down payments. And if you just lost your job, where are you going to come from? Where are you going to get that? So you have to decide between paying your mortgage or getting an attorney, and that's just the retainer. There's a lot of fighting involved, his word against yours. And at the end of the day, what I am really pushing to prove is that when it directly violates language, that's black and white. It should be easy. And I'm really hoping to get some change there. So that's kind of my focus of my mission. So if you know any attorneys that are wanting to help out with that, I think that it's truly important. And I think that's where we are as a society in needing that.
It always goes back to ego. And there's been a lot of these places are run by ego and run by the oppressive idea of not giving to anyone. It's all transactional. And that's how we actually really built the culture that is attempting to be dismantled right now. And I do also believe that the future is hopefully brighter for a lot of those structures to be dismantled and end up in better places and more people like us in those spaces who actually care to listen to, what are the needs of the community and the whole overall. Kind of we're sort of at the end and wrapping things up. I do want to take a little bit of a side trip and go backwards to a story you mentioned super early on in the episode. That was when you were a child and you remember your mom crying, finding out that you were autistic. And, I just want to talk about this and acknowledge it because this is a very common scene and it's one that's not talked about very much. And I don't think there's a lot of well-intentioned people out there that I don't believe understand how damaging scenes like that are and how much they can be internalized. And there is a lot of psychic trauma that is happening as far as the neurodivergent community right now specifically. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how facing things like that and seeing things like that have informed your personal life and how, go about parenting, go about anything in your life.
I have 3 children and all 3 of them, I can identify neurodiversity. My oldest, she has ADHD. My middle one, she's dyslexic. And my youngest, he has ADHD. He just is. And his dad is very resistant. And he said that, I'm trying to give him an excuse for life or whatever. That is not my intention. My intention is and whenever I talk to him about it, I'm like, you know what? It is very cool that you can think the way you can think. And don't let anybody ever tell you that it's broken because we can come up with stuff that is, incredible. And his stories are amazing and he is creative and he is unique. And I love all these things about him, right? But if I am expecting him to look like a neurotypical kid, he's never going to do that. And I think what I would challenge parents with is, one, don't have your kids in the room when you get their results. There's no reason for it, especially young ones. It doesn't impact their lives. They were the same person now that they were 10 minutes ago. They're going to continue being them. I would learn as much as you can from other people who are neuro-affirming, because I think it's really important to know that there are so many incredibly successful neurodivergent people out there. Don't discount what your child is going to be able to do in the future. Don't think that they're going to be, the least popular kid in school forever. At some point, they're going to find their tribe. They're going to find a group of people who really see them and really love them and see them for who they are. That is the message of hope, and they're going to make contributions. So don't let it impact you and don't ever restrain them on what they are challenged to do. There are amazing products out there that will get into the education of these kids and challenge them. What drives kids is dopamine. What drives adult neurodivergence is dopamine. So figure out what inspires your kid to learn. It is not a learning disability. It is a learning difference. And I say that because, you talk to somebody who, according to society, is profoundly autistic. And you ask them about their special interests, they're going to tell you everything that there is to know about it. It is not a learning disability. It's a learning difference because you have to have some motivation. Like my oldest decided that she didn't need to learn multiplication ever. And it took her years to learn multiplication because her little brain decided she didn't need it. And that is a good example. I still was going to challenge her. She doesn't get the excuse to not learn it. But it's going to be different. I need to get creative. So before you let your kids see like the tears, there is no child that has not disappointed their parent at some point. That is the reality of life. There is no parent who makes it through parenting their children without disappointing their children. That is the reality of life. So I don't care who you are. You could be the most perfect person to have walked the face of the earth and you've still disappointed your parent and your parent has still disappointed you. So if you take that as fact, everything else can be dealt with. Just love your kiddo and encourage them and inspire them and make them see the awesome things about them.
It's so true. And dropping the ego. To actually learn from your child means you have to become incredibly humble. And it's not that I'm older, I have more experience, which I hear often parents say. So, because children are teaching us so many amazing things from their angle, from their experiences, and the world is evolving. Just look at technology and AI. So we don't have to raise them the way we grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So that means
they're going to have so much more access to so many different kinds of people. The world is becoming a very small place. Like I'm on conference calls with London so often, I know that they're 6 hours ahead of us. These are things that the world is just getting smaller and smaller to where we're connecting like never before. And I think that is a very cool thing for our kids to have.
Oh, yeah. The boundaries are dropping and we're all realizing, irrespective of our ethnicity, race, gender, we're all just humans. We're all connected. And the more we are authentic and drop our ego and connect more freely.
And when you were talking about, parents saying that, oh, I'm more experienced, I know more. Ironically, when you were saying that, what I was thinking about was that is the exact same perspective that bosses have with their employees. Exactly. So I'm probably going to steal that. Wanted to let you know.
Yeah, no, because it is authority. I mean, power. It's a power dynamic. Who has the more power, sadly, gets to dominate today in the hierarchical structure of either families or in a work environment. But the most brilliant idea could come from that individual contributor. So we have to listen.
Absolutely. And it's important to know that like in a company, in a family, and whatever, closing yourself off to any idea handicaps. In a company, I tell companies all the time, you're the best salesperson your company might have ever seen might be hating their job in billing right now, barely hanging on, getting written up because they hate their job. So open it up, let people move. And families, listen to your kid. They'll tell you. Like you can't, obviously, at some point they have to learn multiplication, right? But throughout everything, if you just keep at it and you find creative ways to do it, look for other products, engage your kiddos' ideas. If you have to do it anyway, figure out something that works for them. And that's the same thing I would tell business, figure out what works for them. You hired the person for a reason,
This goes into a really important lesson for parents as well, because there isn't that huge of a psychological difference between a parent and a boss. And if you are raising your kid to fawn at you and you're not showing them their true potential or reminding them of their true potential and showing them that they are capable of autonomy and there is no shame, then when they get into the workforce, they're not going to recognize the red flags. They're not going to recognize needing to advocate for themselves. They're not going to recognize any of that. And they're going to repeat a cycle that gets them into very damaging positions. Everything has a ripple effect, and you try to aim for having a positive ripple effect and not something that's going to take away from the individual.
Right. And hopefully if we continue to do that and do that well, that will change. I mean, right now, neurodivergents are 80 times more likely to be victims of narcissistic abuse. Neurodivergent women have a 92% chance of experiencing a sexual assault at some point in their lives of some degree. These are unacceptable numbers. Like, they're unacceptable. And it goes back to us feeling like we're inherently broken and we do stay silent. So, teaching your kids that they are valuable and, building them up. I remember seeing a video years ago, this kid was born without any legs at all, and his dad refused to treat him as any different. Like, he was responsible for chores just like the other kids, and when he drove a car and he did all kinds of stuff, and he just said, if my dad had treated me different, I wouldn't be doing all this. And that's the same thing I would encourage parents. Don't treat your kids as different. You make some changes as a parent on how you discipline your kids. I mean, if I say that PIPs don't work for neurodivergence at work, punishment doesn't work for kids at home. So you really got to tell them they did well, praise what they're doing great, and encourage them in other ways.
Very well said. Where can people find you and Curiously Divergent?
Well, I am on LinkedIn. That is probably the best place that you can find me. I am there most often. That's where I do a lot of my talking, and it's where I book everything through ultimately. So that is where you can find me at this point.
Awesome. And I'll edit all information about you and what you do. I will include in the show notes on sparklaunchpodcast.com for this episode, which everyone can find and connect to you and, plug into kind of what you're building, and hopefully even maybe if they wanted to contact you and share their story about what they've experienced. And same thing you can share. Yeah. And same thing, you can come on and share your experience on Spark Launch if you'd ever want to. And all that information, sparklaunchpodcast.com, of course, available in all of your preferred podcast listening methods. And I wanted to thank Lainey for coming on the show and sharing so much insight with us. I really appreciate what you do.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
This episode was brought to you by Sparkade, our ADHD game-based learning platform designed to spark focus, confidence, and joy through play. Join the waitlist today at play.sparkade.app/waitlist. That's play.sparkade.app.